From a completely different mystery school, some philosophy about the ray of creation from the absolute to the earth. Before the beginning was a cause, and the entire purpose of the cause was the creation of effect. In the beginning and forever is the decision, and the decision is to be. The first action of beingness is to assume a viewpoint. The second action of beingness is to extend from the viewpoint points to view, which are dimension points. Thus there is space created, for the definition of space is viewpoint of dimension. And the purpose of a dimension point is space and a point of view. The action of a dimension point is reaching and withdrawing. And from the viewpoint to the dimension points, there are connection and interchange. Thus, new dimension points are made. Thus, there is communication. And thus, there is light. And thus, there is energy. And thus, there is life. But there are other viewpoints, and these viewpoints outthrust points to view. And there comes about an interchange amongst viewpoints, but the interchange is never otherwise than in terms of exchanging dimension points. Now, the symbol behind me is similar to what I was showing you earlier. You take this as a dimension, as a being, thrusts out a point to view, and thrusts out another point to view. And between the being and the viewpoints, there are interchange and communication, and then communication between the viewpoints and interchange. And that's what that triangle means. There are other viewpoints which also put out points to view and other points to view. And there is communication between the viewpoint and the being and the viewpoint, and from viewpoint to viewpoint. So this is one of the meanings of this symbol. And this common area in here is the agreed upon three-dimensional universe. The dimension point can be moved by the viewpoint, for the viewpoint, in addition to creative ability and consideration, possesses willpower and potential independence of action. And the viewpoint viewing dimension points can change in relation to its own or other dimension points or viewpoints. Thus comes about all the fundamentals there are to motion. The dimension points are each and every one, whether large or small, solid. And they are solid solely because the viewpoints say they are solid. Many dimension points combine into larger gases, fluids, or solids. Thus there is matter. But the most valued point is admiration, and admiration is so strong, its absence alone permits persistence. The dimension point can be different from other dimension points, and thus can possess an individual quality. And many dimension points can possess a similar quality. and others can possess a similar quality unto themselves. Thus comes about the quality of classes of matter. The viewpoint can combine dimension points into forms, and the forms can be simple or complex, and can be at different distances from the viewpoints. And so there can be combinations of form, and the forms are capable of motion, and the viewpoints are capable of motion, and so there can be motion of forms. And the opinion of the viewpoint regulates the consideration of the forms, their stillness or their motion, and these considerations consist of assignment of beauty or ugliness to the forms, and these considerations alone are art. It is the opinion of the viewpoints that some of these forms should endure, thus there is survival. And the viewpoint can never perish, but the form can perish. And the many viewpoints interacting become dependent upon one another's forms and do not choose to distinguish completely the ownership of dimension points. And so comes about a dependency upon the dimension points and upon other viewpoints. From this comes a consistency of viewpoint of the interaction of dimension points, and this, regulated, is time. And there are universes. The universes then are three in number. The universe created by one viewpoint, the universe created by every other viewpoint, the universe created by the mutual action of viewpoints which is agreed to be upheld, the physical universe. And the viewpoints are never seen, and the viewpoints consider more and more that the dimension points are valuable. And the viewpoints try to become the anchor points and forget that they can create more points and space and forms. Thus comes about scarcity, and the dimension points can perish, and so the viewpoints assume that they too can perish. Thus comes about death. The manifestations of pleasure and pain, of thought, emotion and effort, of thinking, of sensation, of affinity, reality, communication, of behavior and being are thus derived, and the riddles of our universe are apparently contained and answered herein. There is beingness, but man believes there is only becomingness. The resolution of any problem posited hereby is the establishment of viewpoints and dimension points, the betterment of condition and concourse amongst dimension points, and thereby viewpoints, and the remedy of abundance or scarcity in all things, pleasant or ugly, by the rehabilitation of the ability of the viewpoint to assume a point of view and create and uncreate, neglect, start, change, and stop dimension points of any kind at the determinism of the viewpoint. Certainty in all three universes must be regained, for certainty, not data, is knowledge. In the opinion of the viewpoint, any beingness, anything is better than no thing. Any effect is better than no effect. Any universe better than no universe. Any particle better than no particle. But the particle of admiration is best of all. And above these things there might be speculation only. And below these things there is the playing of the game. But these things which are written here, man can experience and know. And some may care to teach these things, and some may care to use them to assist those in distress. And some may desire to employ them to make individuals and organizations more able. and so give to Earth a culture of which we can be proud. If you're listening to this lecture, you've probably heard somewhere that the world is an illusion or a dream. And what I've just read to you is the technology of that illusion or dreaming. A conscious viewpoint in a blackness with no realities occurring in it puts out a point to look at it. And across the vast expanse of time, the interchange of these viewpoints using their points have created matter and a game out of it, and it's gone on until we have this three-dimensional universe full of problems, and a lot of people are asleep to that. The point of esotericism and schools of higher consciousness or cosmic consciousness is to remind beings that there's more to their powers and perceptions than being totally identified with being in the illusion. And in reality, the illusion is harmless because it's just an illusion, a game, a manufactured game space of the cosmoses, and the amount of beings in the game, there's no number for that because the number of beings is so large, and you have millions, trillions, billions, quadrillions, and someone in Europe coined the term millionies. But I think if you want to really have the answer to something, you have to ask the children, and the children say they have a term for these numbers, which is like zillions. There are zillions of beings in this game, in this universe. And there are many, many universes. So, learning the cosmology is to help you conceptualize into correct categories in a variety of scales, so you can think your way to the realization that you're a conscious being inside of an environment in which you agreed to play. So you are responsible for your own condition. But one can suffer less knowing these things. So I'm going to carry on with the main body of the material now. There is something, I can't find it right now, it's in Scientific American, it's an article called The Holographic Universe, which talks about the surface of the ball that I discussed earlier. They call it the event horizon, and they think that the galaxies are being projected on that surface from something in the middle, but they're afraid to say something in the middle might be spiritual or incorporeal beings. But they've noticed that that's what it looks like. Now, the situation of our solar system within the Milky Way is almost exactly that of a single blood cell within the human body. A white corpuscle is also composed of a nucleus or sun with a cytoplasm or sphere of influence. and it too is surrounded on all sides by untold millions of similar cells or systems, while the whole forming a great being whose nature it could hardly be expected to imagine. If, however, we compare the human body to some great body of the Milky Way, and one cell of it to our solar system, and we wish to find a viewpoint comparable to that of a human astronomer on Earth, we should have to try to imagine the perception of something like a single electron of a molecule of this cell. What could such an electron know about the human body? What indeed could it know about its cell, or even its molecule? Such organisms would be so vast, subtle, eternal, and omnipotent in relation to it, that their true meaning would be utterly beyond its comprehension. Yet no doubt the electron could perceive something of its surrounding universe. And through this impression, and though this impression will be very far from reality, it is interesting for us to imagine it. But these electrons, by the insignificance of their size and duration, would also, like men within the Milky Way, be fixed, one-dimensional points, unable to change their view of the human universe by a single hair's breadth. It is true that their cell would be traveling along its artery, as the sun along its track in the Milky Way, and that this cell might be expected to make many thousand circuits of the great body within the course of its existence. But to the electron this would mean nothing, for in the whole duration of its spark of life, the cell would advance no measurable distance at all. As points, then, the electrons would look out upon a stationary cross-section of the human body, at right angles to the artery in which the cell was destined to move. This cross-section would constitute their visible universe, or the present. Within this universe, they would first and above all be aware of the blazing nucleus of their cell, the source of all light and life for them and for the whole system of worlds in which they lived. Looking beyond this system into the zenith, that is, out of their cross-section and up into the artery, they would see nothing, for that would be where their cell and its universe was going in the future. Equally empty space would lie below them in the rear, for that would be where their universe had come from, or the past. If, however, they looked out along the present plane of their universe, they would see blazing on all sides what appeared to be a brilliant ring formed of an infinite number of other cell nuclei, or suns, more or less distant from their own. Were they of some shrewdness, they might realize that this ring-like appearance was an illusion due to the foreshortening of distance, and instead might suppose a vast disk of cells, of which theirs was but one among many millions. Further, by measuring the density of the cellular cloud to the various positions on the compass, they might even calculate that their own position lay near the center or more to one or other edge of this disk. Thus they could locate their own system within its galaxy, for this disk or ring-like cloud would be their Milky Way. In many ways, the discoveries of the electrons might parallel the discoveries of human astronomers, and they would find themselves faced by very similar problems. As they studied the Milky Way of other cells and applied the subtlest methods of measurement, they might, for instance, gain the idea, as human astronomers have done in like circumstances, that all these cells or suns were imperceptibly receding outwards. From this, human astronomers conclude that the suns of the Milky Way were all created together in a densely packed mass, and have since been spreading outward from the middle in an ever-widening and ever-rarefying disk. They speak of an expanding universe. Were the electrons to reach a similar conclusion regarding their universe, they would of course be describing what happens in a cross-section of the human body after adolescence, when most cells no longer multiply, but the already existing cells spread, stretch, and become laden with water and fat, producing the effect of a body expanding in circumference. At last, when they had exhausted speculation upon their Milky Way, the electrons might descry immeasurable, far beyond its limits, but still upon the same plane, faint lines and clouds which appeared to be similar universes. These we would recognize as the cross-section of other human bodies, but to the electrons they would be extragalactic nebulae. Now, the study of these distant nebulae or universes might introduce some curious problems to the electronic observer. Some he would see simply as lines of light, and he would realize that he was looking at the edge of just such a galactic disk as that in which he found himself. Others, however, might appear circular or spiral, as some nebulae do to us. And in this case, he would guess that he was looking at them as someone in the future or in the past might look at his own universe. How could such a thing be possible? It would mean that the electron, hitherto unable even to imagine the form of the being to which it infinitesimally belonged, was actually seeing the silhouettes of other similar beings, other men standing, lying, or sitting, far away across the plane through which its own universe was moving. These other men or universes would be seen scattered over that landscape, where the electron's universe might itself later go or already have been. That is, the electron would indeed see them as someone in the future or in the past would look at its own universe. The electron would at last be looking at a human galaxy from outside the latter's time, and in this way might gain perhaps for the first time an idea of the form and nature of its own galaxy, that is, of a man. In a similar way, studying extragalactic nebulae, human astronomers have for the first time guessed the form of our own. Moreover, they have found the greatest concentration of such nebulae in the zenith and the nadir of our Milky Way, that is, in the plane through which it is moving, and finding none at right angles along the plane of its diameter. Having supposed an obscuring layer there, but neither course would our electronic astronomer observe other human universes above or below the path of its own, that is, in the sky overhead or in the earth underfoot. For the nature of such human universes would be to move only over the surface of a greater sphere, the earth. In the first section of this chapter, we similarly suppose the vast army of nebulae moving over the surface of a greater sphere, the absolute one. Perhaps, after all, the obscuring layer is corroboration of this idea, and if so, then it is not a mere extension of nebula which is obscured from us, but the very nature of this absolute.